once again, thank you to the French for being such excellent hosts tonight, and thank you to Remy, who just gave a very, very impassioned opposition to Ben. In fact, so impassioned that you should have been running for election in the United States last night. So, that being said, I want to give you a brief outline of what I'm going to go through over my next 5 minutes and 40 seconds. So, I'm going to counter right away what Remy said, and then kind of rehash some of Ben's points, and then go into new independent points about what the United States military actually did in Europe. So the first idea that Remy brings up here is this numbers idea, that there were 15 divisions and like 150,000 men in the French resistance, and compared to the 1 million Americans that landed on D-Day. So like numbers may be like something that can sway some people, but what we're going to argue here is that numbers don't matter at all. Why? Because this isn't a fair comparison. It's not a fair comparison to compare a guerrilla force against a military force that the United States has. So we're going to like throw out those numbers right away and show you why. Because what they're saying also is that a guerrilla force is ineffective, but that isn't necessarily true. As we saw in the United States in the Revolutionary War, like hundreds of years before this, guerrilla forces were extremely organized and were very capable of defeating the British. Not just because, like, they also had French help at the end of that, by the way.
That was precisely my point. Surely you can't deny that you were so desperate you had to call us, the military, broken down, to help you.
Okay, so a lot of stuff changed since the American Revolution to World War II. Okay, so the next point that he brings up here is that Eisenhower inflated the total because he wanted to fight communism. So let's just say that numbers matter in the first place. If they do matter for this argument, then this isn't necessarily the case. Eisenhower wanted to diminish the effect of the French resistance because he didn't want to have to give France that much of a share of Germany. Remember, they divided it up after the war. So, this other idea that he brings up here is that French opportunists only join the resistance when they're winning. Like we said, numbers don't matter. We don't think this will be an important part of the debate. But what he says here is some response to Zion's point of information about the definition of defeating the Nazis. Obviously, like, the French resistance didn't march on Berlin and like cause Adolf Hitler to commit suicide and cause the Germans to like lose World War II. What Zion wanted, the point he wanted to make here is that they contributed a lot to kicking the Nazis out of France. We didn't have to say that they defeated the Nazis in the entire war, but they kicked them out of France. They helped significantly in that regard. That's what we're going to argue here. And furthermore, France is very organized. We were amazed this morning by your subway system. Go to New York sometime and take the New York subways, and you'll see why your French subways are amazing. So, that being said, let's go back on case. Ben gives you the idea of intelligence. Intelligence was extremely important. It's more important. It was more important back then than it is today. And it's extremely important today because we've seen a lot of gaps that the US military and coalition forces committed in Afghanistan. One of them is like, they go to tribal leaders for information. And what happens is, the tribal leaders in Afghanistan tell the US to like order an airstrike on this like, some village that's down the road. But instead of having Al-Qaeda in those villages, they'll actually have like, opposing tribesmen. So, like, American intelligence, not so hot today off of like these difficulties, but they would have had even more difficulties back then. It's really important that they had the French in France, in Europe, to be able to deliver information. And this other point of sabotage is extremely important. This is where guerrilla forces come in. Whereas military forces may be constrained in this regard of like shutting down railways for like just war principles, guerrilla forces were extremely effective in that regard. Second and last one.
Yes, what would have been the use of all of that intelligence if there had been no troops to land in Normandy?
So, they didn't have troops back then, but if you're using the definition of defeating the Nazis, it was extremely important to taking down Hitler's defenses for all of Europe other than the UK. My other teammates will get to that in a later point. So, the next idea that Ben wanted to bring up here is the global impact. And the point that we're going to make here that's extremely important is the Eastern Front defeat the Germans defeated on the Eastern Front with the Soviets rolling in, was facilitated by the French resistance. Because as Ben said, with 60 attacks a day on the resources in France and all the harassment of German troops, the Nazis had to commit more people than they originally thought to France, drawing them away from the Eastern Front. This helped Stalin march through and ultimately defeat the Nazis. So, let me also move on to some new independent points here. Let's talk about what the United States actually did. And I'm going to have 3 points here. First, that they entered the war late. Second, that they may have actually hindered operations for the Allied forces. And finally, that the United States' contribution can be more attributed to their military-industrial complex and their war bonds and such than their actual fighting force. So, first point, the U.S. entered the war late. They entered December 1941 due to the attack on Pearl Harbor. This was the real issue for the United States. They didn't actually enter the European theater until midway and later through 1942 with Operation Torch in North Africa. But why enter North Africa and not France, or like where the real war was in Western Europe? The reason is the U.S. knew they weren't ready to take on the brunt of the forces in Western Europe. So what they did is they invaded Italy because it was easier. But what happened is, so you're going to hear a lot of us tearing down the United States and France, but we're going to add like some more countries to tear down as well. So the war in Italy wasn't really that important either because Moroccan forces and French forces under de Gaulle were very important there. You guys love de Gaulle, we know that. So the next point we want to make here is that the United States may have actually hindered the operation that helped. So Ben told you about Exercise Tiger. Let me tell you more about this. So on D-Day, or like as a rehearsal for D-Day, the United States, or one like battalion of the United States, wanted to rehearse the operation. So what they did is they attacked like a beach in South UK. But like the British weren't told about this, or they were told, but they weren't like told everything. So what happened is 308 people on top of the 750 were killed in friendly fire. This was a huge failure for the United States, an epic fail as we call it on our side of the Atlantic Ocean. But the last point I want to make here really quickly is the Soviets actually really won the war. The Soviets were able to liberate themselves and push the Germans back on the Eastern Front. The United States students of history go into history classes and learn like, oh, the United States didn't actually do that much? What? Like, America isn't really that awesome? It's the truth. Military-industrial complex is the third point. They provided the war bonds, but ultimately it wasn't as big as